What if I told you that one song recorded in just a few hours changed the entire landscape of popular music forever? Today, we're diving into the incredible story behind Rock Around the Clock, the unlikely anthem that kicked down the doors of mainstream America and let rock and roll walk right in. Let's travel back in time to the early 1950s. Post-war America is all about conformity and respectability. Dad goes to work in his gray flannel suit. Mom stays home with her perfect hair and apron, and the whole family gathers around the radio to listen to smooth crooners like Perry Como, Doris Day, and Patti Page. The biggest rebellion teenagers had was maybe staying out past 9 o'clock. Popular music was safe, predictable, and parent-approved. Songs had titles like "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?" But beneath this picture-perfect surface, something was stirring. Black musicians in the South were creating something raw and electric that the mainstream hadn't discovered yet. And change was about to explode from the most unexpected source, a chubby country musician from the Midwest. Meet Bill Haley, born William John Clifton Haley on July 6, 1925 in Highland Park, Michigan. His father was from Kentucky, his mother from England, and young Bill was about as far from a rock star stereotype as you could imagine. Picture a chubby kid with a lazy left eye from a childhood injury that would make him self-conscious his whole life, and that famous spit curl combed strategically across his forehead. He didn't look like a revolutionary, but that's exactly what he was destined to become. At 18, while most kids were thinking about high school graduation, Haley was already forming his first band, called the Down Homers. Picture him in 1943, cowboy hat, red suit, and cowboy boots, traveling the country for 3 years playing honky-tonk bars and small-town stages. He was learning his craft the hard way, one dive bar at a time. After returning home in 1946, Haley's musical journey became a fascinating evolution. He joined a Pennsylvania-based Western swing band, made his first professional recordings, and started experimenting. But Haley was restless. He could feel something new bubbling under the surface of American music. By 1949, he'd formed a new group called the Saddlemen, and this is where the magic started happening. They weren't just playing country anymore. Haley began mixing blues with country and western, adding a driving beat that made people want to move. It was raw, it was energetic, and nobody quite knew what to call it. Then came the breakthrough moment in 1951. The Saddlemen recorded a cover of Rocket 88, a song originally recorded by Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. This made them the first white artist to record what we now recognize as rock and roll. They were literally creating a new genre, one song at a time. Now let's meet the other half of this historic equation. James E. Myers was a composer and music publisher who wrote under the pen name Jimmy DeKnight, probably to distance his more experimental work from his day job. Max C. Friedman was the lyricist, a wordsmith who understood how to craft phrases that would stick in your head for decades. In late 1952, these two men sat down with a simple but revolutionary idea: create a song that captured the energy and excitement of this new sound they were hearing. They called it Rock Around the Clock, a title that perfectly captured the non-stop, all-night energy of youth culture. But here's the fascinating part: they didn't write it for just anyone. They had Bill Haley specifically in mind. They'd been watching his evolution, seeing how he was pushing boundaries, and they knew he was the perfect artist to bring their vision to life. It's one of those beautiful moments in music history where the right song found exactly the right artist at exactly the right time. By 1953, Bill Haley had achieved something remarkable with Crazy Man Crazy, his first song to crack the national charts, reaching number 15 and becoming the first rock and roll song to make it onto the mainstream pop charts. This success caught Jimmy Myers' attention, and he knew his moment had arrived. Myers approached Haley with this new song, Rock Around the Clock, which had already been copyrighted with the U.S. Library of Congress on March 31, 1953. The timing was perfect. Haley had proven he could take this new sound to mainstream audiences, and Myers had the perfect vehicle to do it. But here's what makes this story even more interesting. Myers wasn't just throwing songs at the wall to see what stuck. He'd specifically written this with Haley's energy and style in mind. It was a match made in rock and roll heaven, a meeting of minds that would literally change the course of popular music forever. April 12, 1954, is a date that should be circled in red on every music history calendar. Bill Haley and His Comets. He'd dropped Saddlemen, embraced the space-age Comets name, and walked into Pythian Temple Studios in New York City. It was just supposed to be another recording session. They had a few hours booked, some sheet music, and a song they'd been rehearsing. But in those few precious hours, something extraordinary happened. The energy in the room was electric. Haley's vocals had that perfect blend of country twang and urban swagger. The band, with Danny Cedrone's blazing guitar solo, Johnny Grande's rollicking piano, and that driving rhythm section, laid down a track that was unlike anything mainstream audiences had ever heard. They weren't just recording a song. They were punching an electric guitar-shaped hole right through the fabric of conservative American society. When they walked out of that studio, they had no idea they'd just created a cultural earthquake that would reshape the world. Here's a fascinating piece of rock and roll trivia that might surprise you. Bill Haley's wasn't actually the first recording of Rock Around the Clock. 3 weeks earlier, on March 20th, 1954, a group called Sunny Day and His Knights cut their own version. And you know what? It wasn't bad at all. The song gained modest success around Philadelphia, got some local radio play, and was doing reasonably well in the region. But here's the thing about musical history. Sometimes it's not about being first, it's about being right. While Sunny Day's version was competent, it lacked that special something that would make the whole world pay attention. It was Haley's version that had that indefinable magic, that perfect storm of energy, timing, and cultural readiness that would make Rock Around the Clock not just a song, but a cultural phenomenon. Sometimes the second version becomes the definitive version, and this is a perfect example of that phenomenon. Mark this date in history, July 9th, 1955. Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and His Comets became the first rock and roll song to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But this wasn't just about chart positions or record sales. This was about a seismic cultural shift that would send shockwaves through every aspect of American society. Imagine this moment. Teenagers across America were finally hearing their own soundtrack on mainstream radio. Parents were bewildered, disc jockeys were scrambling to understand this new phenomenon, and record executives were suddenly realizing they'd been sitting on a gold mine. The song didn't just climb the charts, it exploded to the top and stayed there for 8 consecutive weeks. 8 weeks! That's 2 months of America dancing to a rhythm they'd never heard before, singing along to words that celebrated youth, freedom, and the simple joy of rocking around the clock. It was more than a hit. It was a cultural declaration of independence. What made this moment truly revolutionary wasn't just the music. It was the barriers being shattered. Rock and roll had deep, deep roots in African American culture. Rhythm and blues, gospel, jazz, and country blues. For years, this incredible music had been confined to what the industry called race records. Music by black artists, for black audiences, sold in black neighborhoods. But here was Bill Haley, a white musician from the Midwest, taking this sound and bringing it to mainstream white teenagers across America. Now, this wasn't without controversy. Some critics accused white artists of appropriating black music, and they weren't entirely wrong. But what Haley and others were actually doing was more complex. They were serving as cultural bridges, introducing white audiences to sounds and rhythms that would eventually lead them back to the original African American pioneers. It was messy, it was complicated, but it was necessary. Music was breaking down racial barriers one beat at a time, preparing America for bigger changes to come. The cultural impact was immediate and absolutely explosive. Suddenly, teenagers had their own anthem, their own sound, that their parents just didn't understand. The song got its biggest boost when it was featured in the 1955 movie Blackboard Jungle, a film about juvenile delinquency that perfectly captured adult fears about youth culture. When that opening guitar riff blasted through movie theaters, teenagers literally danced in the aisles. Some theaters had to hire extra security. Parents were horrified, calling it the devil's music, predicting the end of civilization as they knew it. Church leaders condemned it, school principals banned it, and some radio stations refused to play it. But that just made teenagers love it more. This wasn't just music, it was a generational battle cry, a soundtrack for rebellion, and a declaration that the younger generation was ready to create their own culture. Sock hops replaced formal dances, jukeboxes became teenage temples, and rocking around the clock became a way of life. Here's where the story gets beautifully ironic. When we think of rock and roll pioneers today, we picture Elvis Presley's sultry sneer, Little Richard's flamboyant energy, or Chuck Berry's duck walk. We imagine leather jackets, slicked back hair, and dangerous good looks. But the man who actually kicked down the door was Bill Haley, a 29-year-old former country singer who looked more like your friendly neighborhood accountant than a rock revolutionary. He wasn't trying to be rebellious or dangerous. He still wore those Western suits, still had that conservative spit curl, and still looked like someone's dad at a church social. But that's exactly what made him perfect for the moment. He was non-threatening enough for nervous radio programmers to take a chance on, mainstream enough for worried parents to tolerate, but exciting enough to ignite something unstoppable in American teenagers. Sometimes revolutions come from the most unexpected sources, and Bill Haley proved that you don't need to look like a rebel to start a rebellion. From that April day in 1954, rock and roll didn't just grow, it exploded into a global cultural force that would reshape every aspect of popular culture. Elvis Presley heard that song and knew his destiny. The Beatles grew up with it playing on their radios. The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Nirvana, and every rock band since owes a debt to that moment. But it's bigger than just music. Rock and roll became the soundtrack for social change, civil rights, women's liberation, anti-war protests. Every major cultural movement of the past 70 years has had rock and roll as its background music. Everything was transformed by the energy and attitude that started with 3 chords and a driving beat in a New York recording studio. That's the true legacy of Rock Around the Clock. Not just a hit song, but the birth of modern popular culture itself. The beautiful thing about Rock Around the Clock is that it reminds us that revolution doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it just shows up as a few guys with instruments and a great song. And sometimes that's all it takes to change the world forever. What do you think? Was Rock Around the Clock really the song that started it all, or do you think rock and roll would have found another way to break through? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed diving into this slice of music history, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the things that shaped our world.